Welcome back to the Nerd Nest. I'm Bill, and on today's video, we're going to take a look at the ROG Ally X. Now, I've only had this for about a day at this point, so it's going to be very early first impressions. Full transparency here, ASUS did send me the Ally X as a review unit. In fact, this is a pre-release engineering sample. You can see the sticker on the back right here that says so. I have to send this back when I'm done making my videos. That said, ASUS doesn't get to tell me what to say. They aren't paying me, and they don't get to see this video before you do. However, I still am under embargo for battery tests and benchmarks, so I can't talk about any of that stuff in this video, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications if you haven't already, because as soon as that embargo lifts, I will be talking about that stuff. In this video, I want to talk about hardware changes, what I like, what I don't like about the Ally X, and right now with ASUS under fire for their RMA process, it's hard to talk about hardware without also talking about that as well. And it turns out that we do have some updates on that front, which I will address at the end of this video. I want to start off with what is the same for the ROG Ally X. First of all, it's the same chip, the AMD Z1 Extreme, so performance should be nearly identical to the ROG Ally and the Lenovo Legion Go. More on why it could be slightly different later on in the video. The Ally X also has the same screen. I've seen a lot of people complain that it isn't an OLED screen, and that was my first reaction as well. OLED screens just look better. They're thinner because they don't need a backlight. They use less power. And as far as I know, there aren't any OLED screens out there that have variable refresh rate. So ASUS had to make a decision. They went with variable refresh rate over OLED, and let's be honest, the screen on the original ROG Ally was absolutely gorgeous anyway, so yeah, I would prefer OLED to LCD, but if this is the LCD that I have to use, then I'll take this LCD. But after the screen and the chip, that's where the similarities end. Much like the OLED refresh for the Steam Deck, everything else has been changed. And for the most part, these changes are improvements over the original design. So let's take a look at those differences, beginning with some size comparisons. Here you can see the Ally X compared to the ROG Ally 2023. The Ally X dimensions are 28.0 by 11.4 by 3.7 centimeters. The Ally 2023 is 28.0 by 11.7 by 3.2 centimeters. So the Ally is a little bit taller and a little bit thinner. Even though it says that they're both 28 centimeters wide, I feel like the Ally X is just a touch wider than the Ally, but not enough that it would matter. Here you can see it next to the Steam Deck, wide, and now height, and now thickness. And here it is next to the Legion Go, which of course dwarfs this thing in comparison thanks to that massive 8.8-inch screen. The original ROG Ally is a fairly flat device. It has grips, but they're very subtle grips, and I personally prefer thicker grips to hold on to that device with. The Ally X takes a step in the right direction, but it doesn't go quite far enough for me. It's absolutely more comfortable than the ROG Ally, but the Steam Deck, in my opinion, is still way more comfortable to hold thanks to those big, chonky handles. But leaving the Steam Deck completely aside for now, just comparing the Ally to the Ally X, ASUS has made significant improvements in comfort over their first iteration, especially right here. The bottom corner on the Ally had a tendency to cut into your palm. Not enough to cause pain, but enough that I constantly would feel it, I would be aware of it, and I didn't particularly like it. The Ally X is much rounder and more comfortable to hold, especially for extended gaming sessions. This is a big change to the original design that I vastly prefer over the Ally 2023. Sticking with the ergonomics, they've slightly altered the position of the inputs just a little bit, and for the most part I do think it's more comfortable, but that doesn't come without a couple of drawbacks that I'll get to later on. Let's talk about the controls, starting with the D-pad, which is a little bit bigger, I think. Don't quote me on this. I don't have calipers to actually measure this with, and if I continue to do hardware reviews, I'll probably end up picking up a set of calipers in order to measure D-pads and face buttons and stuff like that. The D-pad has narrower cardinal directions on it, and they also don't stick up as much as they do on the 2023 version. In addition, it has delineated diagonals. You can absolutely feel the diagonals with your thumb. I actually think the D-pad is a very big improvement over the original. And I put out a video last year comparing the features of the Steam Deck with the ROG Ally. There's a link below at the end of the video so you can check that out. And in that video, I said that the ROG Ally D-pad was better than the Steam Deck. Well, the Ally X D-pad is much better than the D-pad on the Steam Deck. And though for me, and the kinds of games that I tend to play, the D-pad isn't super important. I'm not a fighting game guy, and even when I do play fighting games, I still tend to prefer to use the left stick instead of a D-pad, though most people would say that if you want to be competitive, you want to use D-pads over thumbsticks for fighters. That's not what I'm interested in, though. So for me, the D-pad is fantastic on this. Whether or not it's good enough for fighting games, I'm going to have to leave that to other people to determine, people who play those kind of games. Since I mentioned the sticks, we might as well talk about them. They feel way better. There is so much more resistance now. They feel much tighter and much more responsive. The caps have a deeper depression for your thumb, which is great. This is an upgrade that I didn't know that I wanted, and it's very reminiscent of the Steam Deck LCD to the OLED stick upgrade. I would have loved it if they had capacitive caps like the Steam Deck does for gyro activation, perhaps for the Ally 2. The caps also screw on, so you can get replacement sticks very easily, or even 3D print your own if you want to make taller, different shaped sticks. They've moved the right thumbstick a little bit closer to the screen. This feels more comfortable, and I think it's a good move overall. But I feel like I'm sometimes hitting the screen with my thumb by accident when I have the right stick pushed all the way to the left. But luckily, this is an easy fix that ASUS could pull off. All they need to do is give us the ability to turn off the touchscreen via Command Center, or have it ignore inputs when the sticks are being used. Kind of how my MacBook's trackpad somehow ignores any touches while I'm typing. I don't know if that's something that Windows can do, because whenever I use a Windows laptop, the trackpad gets activated when I'm typing, and that never happens on my MacBook. I would love to see it happen where if I'm moving the stick around at all, the touchscreen just stops working temporarily, and make sure that it's an option so that I can determine whether or not I want that to happen. The face buttons feel like they have more travel to them. They also feel a bit more resistive and stable, and just a touch clickier. I didn't really have a problem with the face buttons before, but these are an improvement. The buttons are still wide and flat, which is my personal preference, and of all of the handhelds that I have, I think that the Ally X has the biggest, flattest buttons. So for me, that's a win. Last up on the front of the device are the menu and view buttons, as well as the Armory Crate and Command Center buttons. These feel nearly identical to the ROG Ally 2023. What I would have liked to have seen is the menu and view buttons moved down to where the Armory Crate and Command Center buttons are, and then move the Armory Crate and Command Center buttons down to the bottom of the device near the speakers. Because almost every time I reach for the view button, I end up pressing the Command Center button by accident, and this happens over and over and over. It happened a bunch with the ROG Ally, and it's continuing to happen with the ROG Ally X, and it's driving me absolutely bananas. Moving up to the top of the device, we've got two USB-C ports now. ASUS ditched their proprietary eGPU solution in favor of a lower bandwidth but more compatible Thunderbolt port, which honestly it surprised the hell out of me. I did not see that coming. I expected that they would stick with the proprietary solution because, you know, it'll make them more money. I'm sure that some people purchase the XG mobile stuff alongside their ROG Ally, and ditching that port might be controversial, but in my opinion, it was the right move, as I feel like the number of people who are actually using that port were few and far between, and the number of people that could find a use for an extra USB-C port on the top are way higher. Is the bandwidth enough on the Thunderbolt port? I'm honestly not sure. I don't have an eGPU in order to test. They're expensive, and I'm not going to run out and buy one. But ASUS, if you're watching this and you're making an eGPU solution that works with Thunderbolt, I would absolutely love to test it out. Speaking of the USB-C ports, what I would have really liked to see on this is one on the top and one on the bottom, so that you could sell a dock separately that you could just slide the ROG Ally X into without having to have that extra wire come over the top, kind of like the Nintendo Switch. I think that would have been a more elegant solution than having both ports on top, but there might be other reasons why they ended up putting both ports on top that I'm not aware of. Besides that, we have our volume buttons, which are much clickier than the original, but they're still in a bad position. I hated the position of the volume rocker on the ROG Ally 2023, and the Ally X is different, but it's still not better. I still can't reach it without letting go of the Ally X with one hand in order to press the buttons. So most of the time, I usually just use Command Center and the touch screen in order to change the volume. However, this introduces a problem when you're playing a game and you bring up Command Center, and for some reason the game that you're playing is still registering inputs. So when you, let's say I'm playing a first-person shooter, and I bring up Command Center and then I touch the screen, my character starts shooting because it's reading that as a mouse input, which is absolutely driving me crazy. The SD card reader has been moved over to the right side of the unit. Hopefully ASUS has figured out whatever issue was causing issues with the SD card reader. They did a live stream the other day talking about this. I'm going to tackle that at the end of the video. Right now I want to stick with hardware for now. Next to the SD card reader is the 3.5mm headphone port, and beside that is the power button with the fingerprint sensor. The power button on the Ally was flush with the casing, and I constantly found myself trying to hunt around for it. I just couldn't find it by feel. The power button on the Ally X is recessed a little bit, so it's much easier to find by feel, and the fingerprint sensor also seems to work better. I constantly ran into issues with the fingerprint sensor on the Ally 2023 just not recognizing me, so I stopped using it altogether. On the Ally X, it's doing a much better job signing me in, and it makes the whole process a lot faster. I always found the bumpers on the original ROG Ally to be a little bit too high for me. For example, the deck bumpers, they feel like they're behind the front of the device, and on the Ally 2023 the bumpers felt like they were above the front of the device, and I didn't like the way that felt. The Ally X feels pretty much the same, except I don't feel like I have to move my fingers as far in order to activate them. In fact, I can leave my fingertips on the triggers and then use this part of my finger in order to activate the bumpers. The triggers of the Ally X have also been moved toward the bottom of the device just a little bit. If you look at the Ally 2023 and the Ally X side by side, you can see that the bumpers of the Ally X protrude past the triggers just a bit more. Whereas the Ally, the top of the trigger and the bottom of the bumper are almost flush with each other. On top of that, the triggers are now wider. My fingers are much more comfortable resting on the triggers than they were on the Ally 2023. ASUS has also left a part of the trigger textured and the other part of the trigger is smooth. They did this with the bumpers as well. On the triggers, I can absolutely feel the difference between the smooth part and the textured part. But on the bumpers, my fingers never reach that part of the bumper, so it doesn't really feel like it has any of effect, but aesthetically it looks good. The smooth part on the triggers feels great. I feel like my fingertip is almost sticking to it just a little bit. I think that it is a very, very good design on these triggers. Okay, we're done on the top. Let's take a look at the back, where we've got a very big change for the macro buttons on the back of the Ally. You can see here that ASUS made them much, much smaller. Now, I will admit, I liked the paddles that were on the back of the Ally 2023. I felt like when I was holding the 2023 Ally, my middle finger would use them as kind of a grip, but that also meant that I did hit them by accident once in a while. Never often enough to annoy me or anything, but it did happen. Well, I don't think that's going to be happening with the Ally X. The X has much much smaller buttons, and my hands don't naturally rest on them. In fact, I'm going to have to reach for them in order to use them. I think that this could be both a good thing and a bad thing. These new ones feel better. I like the way that they click, but you have to spend extra energy reaching for them from a neutral position. So will they feel as responsive? I don't know. I'm going to need more time with the Ally X before I can say if I like the change to the macro buttons or not. That said, I do think that they are easier to ignore. So if you never use back paddles, and I know there's a lot of people out there that don't, they will just kind of melt away and disappear, and you won't have to think about them, which is exactly what you want for optional buttons that most games, well, I think pretty much any game doesn't plan around. For example, the Legion Go, which I love, has a bunch of extra buttons on the right controller for their first-person shooter mode. The issue is that I constantly click these buttons by accident. And yes, they don't do anything if I'm not in first-person shooter mode, but that extra click pulls me out of the game because my brain can't help but think, oh, I clicked on something. What did that do? That's all the external stuff. Let's move on and talk about the internal changes, starting with the battery. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I cannot give you hard numbers when it comes to the battery tests, but it isn't going to surprise anybody that the Z1 Extreme chipset, which is the same one in the 2023 version, is going to last longer on an 80 watt-hour battery than it did on the original 40 watt-hour battery. Whether or not it stacks up against the Steam Deck is going to have to wait, as battery tests are under embargo still. But speaking of the battery, when it does run out, you now have the ability to charge it faster. The Ally 2023 came with a 60 watt fast charging power brick. The same charger comes with the Ally X, but the X has the ability to use chargers that go up to 100 watts. So you'll be able to top off that battery much faster. Anybody that's watched my channel for any length of time has probably seen me talk about third-party charging bricks, and nobody's paying me to say this, but I use them all the time. In fact, the ROG Ally cord, the Steam Deck cord, my MacBook cord, they've never actually been plugged in here at my house because I just use my third-party chargers. They're better than the wall warts that come with any of these devices. I've linked in the description down below, that like button, affiliate links for the chargers that I used and the charging solutions that I use. So if you want to support the channel and avoid the crappy chargers that come with these devices, check out the link down below. Then we've got the fan. Now, the ROG Ally 2023 was one of the quietest fans that I've ever seen in a handheld PC, and somehow ASUS has managed to make it even quieter, which is crazy. The fan is very quiet, and unless you're sitting in an absolutely silent room, it's really not going to be audible over whatever game that you're playing. Can you hear it? Absolutely, you can. But I think it's perfectly reasonable to expect to hear fans cooling down your hardware when you are playing demanding titles. The speakers are the same speakers that are in the Ally 2023, but they do have a bigger chamber inside. This should translate to better sound, but for me, it sounds pretty much the same, which is to say, it sounds great. Between the Deck and the Legion Go and the ROG Ally had the best audio of the three. So if this is even slightly better, then it is still the best. Here, I'm going to play the audio from the ROG Ally 2023. And now here's some audio of the ROG Ally X. Both were at 50% volume, and the microphone was exactly the same distance from both. So let me know what you guys think about it. I haven't adjusted anything about what you're hearing right now. The storage has also been upgraded. It's now a 1 terabyte drive, and they've moved that 1 terabyte drive from M.2 2230 up to a 2280 drive. It's a little bit bigger, but that also means it's going to be cheaper to upgrade your storage if you want. I'm currently looking at picking up a 4 terabyte M.2 drive for my ROG Ally X, which is nuts. But I think once I do that, I will never have to think about storage again on this device, whether I even bother to put an SD card in this thing or not. ASUS also upgraded the RAM. They went from 16 gigs up to 24 gigs. So now you can keep 16 gigs available for the CPU and 8 gigs available for the GPU, which is a very common setup on Steam. Most games probably that won't have that big of an effect, but we'll absolutely see improvements for some games. Again, no benchmarks in this video, but no one should be surprised to see that more RAM will help some games perform better. Let's talk about the software. The Ally X runs Windows, and that means it comes with all of the good things and all of the bad things that always comes with Windows. The good things, games are just more compatible with Windows. You're going to run into fewer issues with anti-cheat or launchers gumming up the works. But Windows is clunky and it's kind of a pain in the ass to use. Even if you just boot into Steam Big Picture mode, which is what I tend to do, you'll always have some issues where Windows is like, hey, you're not on a console, you got to do some Windows stuff here, and I hate it. Full credit to ASUS, is they've done pretty much everything that they can in order to make Windows more tolerable on a handheld thanks to Armoury Crate. As of this recording right now, I am on Armoury Crate 1.5.7.0, but in order to do that, I had to do a manual BIOS update and uninstall Armoury Crate and then reinstall Armoury Crate using this new version. I've been told by ASUS that end users are not going to have to go through that. It's just because I have a pre-release unit. But the new Armoury Crate is full of updates that are supposed to make it more streamlined. Like software drivers, BIOS, and updates, all of that stuff is going to be handled by Armoury Crate now, which is a huge improvement over what I had to do previously, which was update Windows stuff, then update the My ASUS app, and then update through Armoury Crate. And sometimes they didn't get all of the updates, so I'd have to go back in and do it all again. Hopefully, ASUS's promises are met and the update process on the ROG Ally X and hopefully the ROG Ally are smoother sailing. All right, let's talk about support. ASUS recently got into hot water again after last year's motherboard debacle. This time it comes down to the RMA process with the ROG Ally, thanks to Gamers Nexus sending in their 2023 Ally anonymously and then reporting on what they found. If you haven't watched the Gamers Nexus videos about the RMA process, my recommendation is before you make any purchasing decisions at all, watch those videos. The latest one is it has Steve going face to face with executives at ASUS, holding their feet to the fire and extracting significant promises from them. In addition, ROG Pulse, which is the official, I guess I'm going to call it a podcast about ASUS stuff, recently had a live stream where they talked about the SD card issue in the 2023 Ally. Again, before you spend any money, you should watch that as well. I've linked to these videos down below that like button, but this video isn't about a bad RMA process that I personally have yet to experience. I can't really speak about it because I haven't experienced it, but lots and lots of people have had that experience, and it is absolutely something that you need to consider before making a purchase. So, should you make that purchase? Should you upgrade? Honestly, I feel like that depends on your disposable income. If you have extra cash lying around, you can find somebody to buy your current handheld, or you could like hand it down to a kid or a spouse and then get yourself the new hotness. This hardware is very easy to recommend if you're okay with Windows. But if money's tight, I just keep saving, as next year or maybe the year after, I'll bet we'll see new chipsets that will have actual performance bumps over the Z1 Extreme handhelds that are out there. But if you don't currently have a handheld PC and the games that you want to play won't run on the Steam Deck, or maybe you just want something with more power than the Steam Deck, then I think the ROG Ally X is a really great handheld. And if I were in the market to buy one, I wouldn't even consider buying the ROG Ally 2023 at this point unless you could get it for like $200 used. The X is better in way too many ways to ignore if you can get past the price tag. But that's going to do it for this video. If you enjoyed it, you're probably going to enjoy this video right here. Go watch it and click the like button before you go. From the Nerd Nest, I'm Bill, and I hope you stay rad. Bye-bye.